Chapter 1. The Whispers in the Walls. The first thing I remember after the crash, after the metal contorted around me like a dying beast, was the quiet. Not the absence of sound, but a deep, oppressive quiet that pressed against my eardrums, a suffocating stillness that amplified every creak and groan of the ruined vehicle. Then came the cold. It seeped into my bones, a glacial tendril wrapping around my heart, stealing the heat that should have been there. My name is Thomas Blackwood, or at least it was. Now I barely remember what I am, what I was before that fateful night. All I know is this house, this crumbling, skeletal mockery of a home, and the whispers that slither through its decaying walls. It all started when my wife, Sarah, inherited the old Blackwood estate, a sprawling manor house tucked away deep in the isolated forests of the Maine coastline. Her grandmother, it seemed, had been eccentric, hoarding a fortune and a strange fascination for all things obscure and occult. When she passed, the estate was left to Sarah, with a curt note about it being the only thing of true value in this world. Little did we know the value of the estate was not money or property. It was something far more sinister. Sarah, ever the romantic, was thrilled. We had talked of escaping the city, of leaving behind the cacophony of honking cars and the relentless, intrusive gaze of the city. We had dreamed of a quiet life. Little did we know how quiet it would become. The journey north was uneventful, the crisp autumn air a promise of the serenity that awaited. The landscape gradually transformed into a tapestry of vibrant reds, oranges, and yellows, the trees a riot of color against the steely gray of the sky. When we finally turned down the long, winding driveway, the house appeared. It was imposing, no doubt, but also unsettling. It had a kind of cold, unyielding beauty, a stark monument of Gothic architecture, and even in the bright light of day, it seemed to cast a long, menacing shadow. That first night we explored the house, a labyrinth of echoing rooms and dust-covered antiques. Sarah, filled with giddy excitement, flitted from room to room, her laughter echoing through the cavernous halls. I, however, felt a growing sense of unease. There was a strange chill in the air, even with the fireplaces roaring. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a silent energy, a palpable sense of watchfulness. The whispers were not yet audible, but the silence of the house, the stillness, was already saturated with a strange undercurrent, a sense of dread that clung to my skin. I tried to explain the feeling to Sarah, to articulate the mounting anxiety, but she dismissed it as the lingering effects of the journey, the adjustment from city life to the isolation of the wilderness. She had a talent for seeing the best in everything, a remarkable ability to find light in the darkest corners. I envied her optimism, her unyielding spirit. That night we slept in the master bedroom, a vast space with a four-poster bed, an enormous fireplace, and an ornate, dusty mirror that reflected the flickering flames. I woke in the dead of the night to a feeling of ice in my veins, a cold so intense I could see my breath. Sarah was sleeping peacefully beside me, but something was terribly wrong. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. The room was cloaked in shadows, the fire now just smoldering embers. Then I heard it, a faint sound, barely audible above the crackling fire, a whisper. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, a sibilant rustle, a fleeting fragment of a sound that brushed against the edge of comprehension. Thomas. I strained my ears, my body rigid with fear. The whisper faded, swallowed by the silence. I shook myself, convincing myself it was a dream, a trick of the night. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It became a recurring pattern. The whispers, at first barely audible, slowly became more distinct, more frequent. They would start with my name, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to seep from the very timbers of the house. Then they would progress to snippets of conversation, fragmented sentences and phrases, words that seemed to be ripped from some half-remembered memory. Do. Leave. Never. I began to document everything. I kept a journal, filling its pages with descriptions of the whispers, the unsettling atmosphere of the house, my growing terror. I tried to talk to Sarah about it, to convince her that something was not right, but she brushed it off, attributing it to stress, sleeplessness, the house's age. Her unwavering belief in the mundane began to frustrate me. "It's just the wind, Thomas," she would reassure me. "Old houses settle, they creak, they make noise. It's nothing to be concerned about." Then the nightmares began. Vivid, terrifying visions that invaded my sleep, playing on my deepest fears. I saw myself trapped in the house, the walls closing in, the darkness pressing down on me. Figures flickered at the periphery of my vision, obscured by shadows, their faces distorted with malice. I would wake in a cold sweat, my heart racing, the whispers echoing in my ears. One morning I woke to find a symbol scratched into the dusty mirror in the master bedroom. It was a crude, unsettling design, a circle bisected by a line with strange, jagged edges. It looked ancient, archaic, and utterly alien. I didn't know where it came from. I knew Sarah wouldn't do anything like that. This wasn't a prank, this was something else entirely. I tried to wipe it away, but the scratches resisted. Then, in that same moment, the whispers changed. They became more insistent, more demanding. They were no longer whispers, they were voices. "Join us. Serve us. Become one." It was then that I made a crucial decision. I began researching the history of the house, of the Blackwood family. I spent days in the musty library, poring over forgotten documents, yellowed letters, and faded photographs. I discovered that Sarah's grandmother had been obsessed with the occult, a dabbler in dark rituals and forbidden knowledge. There were rumors of secret societies, of pacts with unseen forces, of a dark entity that haunted the estate. I wanted Sarah to leave, to take us both and get away from this nightmare. But Sarah refused. She was enjoying her time here. She loved the quiet, she loved the property. She could be stubborn. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that the house was not just haunted, it was possessed. That the whispers, the voices, were not the echoes of the past but the summons of something malevolent, something ancient, and something that wanted us. I told Sarah, but she didn't listen. She looked at me with pity and concern, like I had lost my mind. She told me it was time to stop drinking and that I needed to get some rest. Then came the crash. The car veered off the road on a dark and stormy night, a flash of metal against the endless forest, followed by a sickening crunch. I vaguely remember screaming her name as the world turned black. Now I am here, trapped in the wreckage of our lives. The voices have grown stronger, more persistent. I can no longer tell what's real and what isn't, what happened before the crash and what happened after. The memories are fading, blurring, distorted by the darkness. I can feel something crawling under my skin, something alien, something that is calling to me from the depths of the house. I can hear the whispers now, clearer than ever, coming from the shadows. They promise escape, power, and acceptance. But I know deep down that they are a lie, a cruel and seductive lie that is leading me to a fate worse than death. I can feel it now. It is starting to take hold. "Come to us," the voice whispers. I look around and I see the darkness, and the darkness looks back. Chapter 2: The Garden of Graves. The immediate aftermath of the car crash is a hazy collage of distorted images. I remember the splintered glass, the twisted metal biting into my flesh, the acrid smell of gasoline mingling with the earthy scent of the forest floor. I remember the cold, a relentless, all-consuming chill that seemed to emanate from the very ground. But most of all, I remember Sarah. She was slumped against the passenger seat, her head lolling at an unnatural angle. Her eyes were closed, and a thin trickle of blood snaked from the corner of her mouth. I reached out to touch her, my hand trembling, but I couldn't bring myself to feel for a pulse. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was gone. The grief hit me then, a crushing weight that threatened to suffocate me. I screamed her name, a primal cry of anguish that echoed through the silent forest. But there was no response, only the sound of the wind whispering through the trees, a mournful lament that mirrored the desolation in my heart. I tried to move to free myself from the wreckage, but my body was trapped, pinned beneath a tangle of metal and shattered plastic. Pain lanced through my leg, a searing agony that threatened to overwhelm me. I was stuck, alone and helpless in the middle of nowhere. Hours passed. The storm raged around me, the rain a relentless torrent that battered the car. The temperature plummeted and I shivered uncontrollably, my body numb with cold. I drifted in and out of consciousness, haunted by visions of Sarah, her lifeless eyes staring at me accusingly. Then, in a moment of lucidity, I heard the whispers again. They were closer now, clearer, emanating from the darkness surrounding the car. They were no longer just voices. They were a chorus, a cacophony of murmuring voices that seemed to emanate from the very earth. Let her go. She is ours now. Join her. Fear surged through me, a cold, paralyzing terror that pushed back the grief. I realized then that I was not alone. Something was out there, something malevolent, something drawn to the tragedy of the crash, feeding off my grief and despair. Driven by a primal instinct for survival, I managed to free myself from the wreckage. The pain in my leg was excruciating, but I pushed it aside, fueled by adrenaline and terror. I stumbled out of the car, into the storm, desperate to escape the whispering voices. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away. I limped through the forest, the undergrowth tearing at my clothes, the rain blinding me. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning, which illuminated the twisted trees and the looming shadows that danced at the edge of my vision. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more insistent. They seemed to be coming from everywhere, from the trees, the ground, the very air itself. They were no longer just voices. They were a presence, a tangible force that pressed against me, suffocating me. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a stone wall, overgrown with ivy and moss. Beyond the wall, I could make out the faint outline of a structure, a dark, looming shape against the stormy sky. It was the Blackwood estate. Desperate for shelter, for any kind of respite from the storm and the voices, I stumbled towards the wall. I found a gap in the stonework, a crumbling section that had collapsed over time. I squeezed through the opening, into what appeared to be a garden. But this was no ordinary garden. It was overgrown, neglected, and utterly desolate. The once manicured lawns were now tangled with weeds and brambles. The flower beds were choked with dead and decaying foliage. The air was thick with the cloying scent of rot and decay. And then I saw them. Headstones. Dozens of them scattered throughout the garden, half hidden by the overgrown vegetation. They were old, weathered, and covered with moss and lichen. Some were broken, toppled over, or partially buried in the earth. This was not just a garden, it was a graveyard. A forgotten, overgrown cemetery hidden away in the heart of the Blackwood estate. As I stumbled through the garden, reading the names on the headstones, a sense of dread washed over me. Many of the names were familiar. Blackwood. They were the family names, the ancestors who had lived and died on this estate. I stopped in front of one headstone in particular, a crumbling marker that was half hidden beneath a tangle of vines. I brushed away the foliage, revealing the inscription. Sarah Blackwood, beloved wife and daughter. 1888–1910. My blood ran cold. I stared at the headstone, my mind reeling. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the name was there, etched in stone, a chilling reminder of the dark history of this place. Then I heard the whispers again. They were louder now, triumphant, emanating from the headstone itself. Welcome home. She's been waiting for you. Join us, Thomas. I looked around, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel their presence, their malevolent gaze, watching me from the shadows. Then, from behind a gnarled oak tree, a figure emerged. It was tall, gaunt, and cloaked in shadows. Its face was obscured, hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the overgrown lawn as if it were floating. As it drew closer, I could hear a faint rustling sound, a sibilant whisper that seemed to emanate from its very being. "Welcome, Thomas," the figure said, its voice a raspy whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "We've been expecting you." I tried to speak, to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. I was paralyzed by fear, trapped in the Garden of Graves, facing a figure that seemed to embody the very essence of darkness. "Don't be afraid," the figure said, extending a skeletal hand towards me. "We only want to help you, to show you the truth." I stared at the outstretched hand, my mind reeling. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was not a savior. This was something far more sinister. This was the horror that had been whispering in the walls, the entity that had claimed Sarah's life. And it was inviting me to join it. Chapter 3: The Ritual Chamber. My legs felt like lead, rooted to the overgrown earth of the Blackwood family graveyard. The figure before me, shrouded in shadow and whispering promises, was an embodiment of the dread that had been building since the moment Sarah and I arrived at the estate. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee back into the storm, to anywhere but here. But terror had locked my muscles in place, leaving me a statue in this macabre garden. "The truth," I finally managed to croak, my voice a dry rasp. "What truth?" The figure tilted its head, the movement disturbingly fluid, like a bird of prey sizing up its quarry. "The truth about this house, about your wife, about yourself, Thomas. The truth about the power that resides here." The wind howled around us, whipping the branches of the ancient trees into a frenzy. Rain lashed against my face, blurring my vision, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from the figure. It radiated an aura of ancient power, a palpable sense of darkness that seemed to warp the very air around it. "Sarah is dead," I said, the words heavy with grief and a burgeoning anger. "You killed her." The figure chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Death is merely a transition, Thomas, a doorway to a new beginning, and Sarah has embraced her new beginning with remarkable enthusiasm." "Liar," I hissed, taking a shaky step forward. "You're insane." "Insane?" the figure echoed, its voice laced with amusement. "Perhaps, but is it truly insane to seek understanding, to embrace the forces that govern our world? Or is it insane to cling to the illusion of normalcy, to deny the darkness that lurks beneath the surface?" It raised its hand, beckoning me forward. "Come, Thomas, let me show you." Against my better judgment, compelled by a mixture of fear and a desperate need for answers, I followed the figure deeper into the overgrown graveyard. We passed beneath the skeletal branches of ancient yew trees, their twisted limbs forming a Gothic archway that seemed to lead to another world. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and something else, something acrid and metallic, like blood. As we walked, the figure began to speak of the history of the Blackwood family, of their dark secrets and their pacts with unseen entities. It spoke of rituals performed under the light of the full moon, of sacrifices made in the name of ancient gods, of the power that had accumulated within the walls of the estate over generations. Sarah's grandmother was a devout follower, the figure explained, its voice barely audible above the howling wind. She understood the potential of this place, the power that could be harnessed, but she lacked the strength, the will to fully embrace it. "And what about Sarah?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Did she know?" "She was beginning to understand," the figure replied cryptically. "But she was not ready, not until you arrived." We reached the far end of the graveyard, where a crumbling mausoleum stood silhouetted against the stormy sky. Its stone facade was cracked and weathered, its bronze doors green with age. The symbol I had found scratched on the mirror in the master bedroom was etched above the entrance, a dark and ominous warning. The figure turned to me, its shadowed face finally illuminated by a flash of lightning. I gasped, recoiling in horror. Its features were gaunt and skeletal, its eyes hollow and black, filled with an ancient, malevolent intelligence. It was the face of death itself. "This is where the truth lies, Thomas," it whispered, its breath cold against my cheek. "Are you ready to see?" It reached out and pushed open the heavy bronze doors of the mausoleum. They groaned in protest, revealing a dark and forbidding interior. The air that rushed out was stale and musty, carrying the stench of decay and something else, something indescribably foul. Hesitantly, I stepped inside. The interior of the mausoleum was even more unsettling than the graveyard. The walls were lined with stone shelves, upon which rested rows of coffins, their surfaces tarnished and corroded. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling, obscuring the faint light that filtered through the cracks in the walls. In the center of the room, a stone altar stood bathed in the eerie glow of a single flickering candle. Upon the altar lay a collection of disturbing objects: a human skull, a silver dagger, a book bound in human skin. "This is the ritual chamber," the figure announced, its voice echoing through the mausoleum, "where the Blackwood family has communed with the darkness for generations." I stared at the altar, my stomach churning. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I struggled to keep from vomiting. This was madness, pure and utter madness, but I couldn't deny the chilling reality of what I was seeing. The figure glided towards the altar, its movements unnervingly silent. It picked up the silver dagger, its blade glinting in the candlelight. "Tonight, Thomas," it said, turning to face me, "you will join us. You will become one with the power that resides here. You will transcend the limitations of mortality and embrace your true potential." It raised the dagger, its eyes burning with an unholy light. "Tonight you will become Blackwood." Chapter 4: The Taste of Blood. The sight of the dagger, glinting ominously in the flickering candlelight, snapped me out of my stupor. The horror of the mausoleum, the figure's pronouncements, the weight of the Blackwood family's dark history, it all coalesced into a single, overwhelming wave of fear. But beneath the fear, something else flickered to life. A spark of defiance, a desperate refusal to surrender. "No," I said, my voice stronger this time, fueled by adrenaline and a primal instinct for survival. "I won't." The figure merely smiled, a chilling rictus that stretched its skeletal features. "You have no choice, Thomas. Your destiny is intertwined with this house, with this family, with this power. You cannot escape it." It took a step towards me, the dagger held high. I stumbled backward, knocking against one of the stone shelves, sending a coffin tumbling to the floor. The sound echoed through the mausoleum, a deafening crash that seemed to amplify the horror of the moment. "Don't make this difficult, Thomas," the figure said, its voice laced with a chilling patience. "Embrace your destiny." I knew that reasoning with it was futile. This was not a rational being. It was something ancient and malevolent, driven by an insatiable hunger for power. My only chance was to escape, to somehow find a way to survive. I turned and fled, scrambling through the mausoleum, dodging coffins and cobwebs, desperate to reach the entrance. The figure pursued me, its movements impossibly fast, gliding through the darkness like a phantom. I burst out of the mausoleum into the storm. The rain lashed against my face, obscuring my vision, but I didn't stop. I ran blindly through the graveyard, stumbling over headstones and tangled vegetation, the figure hot on my heels. I reached the crumbling stone wall and squeezed through the opening, back into the forest. The trees loomed around me, their branches swaying in the wind like skeletal arms. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the occasional flash of lightning. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from the figure, from the whispers, from the Blackwood estate. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs screamed in protest, until I could no longer feel the pain in my injured leg. Finally, I collapsed, exhausted and terrified at the base of a towering oak tree. I lay there, gasping for breath, listening for any sign of pursuit. The whispers had faded, replaced by the sound of the wind and the rain. But I knew that the figure was still out there, somewhere in the darkness, hunting me. As I lay there, shivering and soaked to the bone, I remembered something the figure had said. Sarah has embraced her new beginning. The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a renewed sense of dread. What did it mean? What had happened to Sarah after the crash? Was she truly dead, or had she transformed into something else? Driven by a desperate need to know the truth, I forced myself to stand. I had to go back. I had to find Sarah. I turned and stumbled back towards the Blackwood estate, my heart pounding in my chest. The storm had intensified, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain falling in sheets. The darkness seemed to press in on me, suffocating me. As I approached the clearing, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The mausoleum doors were open, bathed in an eerie green glow, and standing in the doorway was a figure, silhouetted against the light. It was Sarah, but it wasn't the Sarah I knew. Her eyes glowed with the same unholy light as the figure in the mausoleum. Her skin was pale and translucent, her features gaunt and skeletal. She radiated an aura of ancient power, a palpable sense of darkness. "Thomas," she said, her voice a chilling whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "You've come back, I knew you would." I stared at her, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It had to be a nightmare. But the look in her eyes, the darkness that emanated from her very being, was undeniable. "Sarah," I whispered, my voice trembling, "what have they done to you?" She smiled, a chilling rictus that stretched her skeletal features. "They've shown me the truth, Thomas. They've shown me the power that resides here, and now I want to share it with you." She extended her hand towards me, her fingers long and skeletal. "Join us, Thomas, become one with us." I recoiled in horror, shaking my head. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "I won't." Sarah's smile faded, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You disappoint me, Thomas," she said, her voice laced with venom. "I thought you were stronger than this. I thought you were worthy." She raised her hand, and the wind howled around us, the trees swaying violently. The rain intensified, lashing against my face. The darkness seemed to press in on me, suffocating me. "If you won't join us willingly," she said, her voice rising to a scream, "then we'll make you." Suddenly the earth beneath my feet began to tremble. The ground cracked and split, and skeletal hands burst forth from the graves, grasping at my legs. I screamed, struggling to free myself, but the hands were too strong, pulling me down into the darkness. I felt a sharp pain in my leg, as one of the skeletal hands clamped shut with a bone-crushing grip. The world spun around me, and I felt myself falling into a dark and bottomless abyss. Then everything went black. When I awoke, I was lying on the stone altar in the mausoleum. My body was numb, my head throbbing. I could taste blood in my mouth, a metallic, coppery flavor that filled me with nausea. Sarah stood over me, her eyes glowing with an unholy light. She held the silver dagger in her hand, its blade stained with blood. "Welcome, Thomas," she said, her voice a chilling whisper. "You're one of us now." Chapter 5: The Echoes of the Damned. The cold stone of the altar pressed against my back, a stark contrast to the burning sensation that now coursed through my veins. The metallic taste of blood lingered on my tongue, a grim reminder of the ritual that had just taken place. Sarah, or the twisted mockery of her that stood before me, loomed over me, her eyes burning with a predatory hunger. What did you do to me?" I managed to stammer, my voice a mere whisper. My body felt alien, disconnected, as if it no longer belonged to me. "We opened your eyes, Thomas," Sarah replied, her voice a chilling echo of the woman I once loved. "We showed you the truth. You are no longer bound by the limitations of mortality. You are one of us now." She gestured around the mausoleum, the silver dagger glinting in her hand. This is your home now, Thomas. This is where you belong, with us. I tried to sit up, but my limbs were heavy, unresponsive. A wave of nausea washed over me, and I felt the urge to vomit. But nothing came out, only a dry, heaving cough that racked my body. "What about Sarah?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "The real Sarah, what happened to her?" A flicker of something, sadness perhaps, or regret, crossed her face, but it was gone in an instant. "She is a part of me now, Thomas. A memory, a fragment of what I once was, but I am more than her. I am something greater, something more powerful." She reached out and touched my face, her fingers cold and skeletal against my skin. "You will understand, Thomas. In time, you will embrace your new identity. You will forget the man you once were." I closed my eyes, desperate to shut out the horror of what was happening. But the images persisted, flashing through my mind like a macabre slideshow. Sarah's lifeless body in the wreckage of the car, the figure in the graveyard, the ritual on the altar, the taste of blood. A single tear escaped my eye, tracing a path down my cheek. I had failed her. I had failed to protect her from the darkness that had consumed her. And now I was being consumed as well. When I opened my eyes again, Sarah was gone. The mausoleum was silent, save for the sound of the wind howling outside. I was alone, trapped in the darkness with nothing but my thoughts for company. Hours passed. The storm raged on and the mausoleum grew colder and colder. I lay on the altar, my body numb, my mind reeling. I tried to make sense of what had happened, to find a way to escape this nightmare. But the more I thought, the more confused I became. The memories were blurring, distorted by the darkness. I could no longer tell what was real and what wasn't. Then I heard the whispers again. They were louder now, more insistent, filling the mausoleum with their sibilant murmur. But they were not the same whispers I had heard before. These whispers were different. They were fragments of thoughts, echoes of memories, snippets of conversations. And they were all coming from me. I realized then that the ritual had done more than just transform me. It had opened my mind to something else, something ancient and malevolent. I could hear the thoughts of the dead, the echoes of their tormented souls, trapped within the walls of the Blackwood estate. It was a cacophony of voices, a symphony of suffering, a chorus of the damned, and it was driving me insane. I screamed, a primal cry of anguish that echoed through the mausoleum, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, until they were deafening. I clutched my head, trying to block out the voices, but they were inside me now, a part of me, and I could not escape them. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. "Leave me alone." But the whispers only grew louder, mocking me, tormenting me. Then, amidst the cacophony of voices, I heard one that was clear, distinct, and horrifyingly familiar. "Thomas." It was Sarah's voice, but it wasn't the Sarah I knew, the Sarah I loved. This voice was cold, cruel, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Join us, Thomas," she said, her voice a chilling whisper. "Embrace your destiny, become one with us." "No," I screamed, my voice breaking. "I won't, I'll fight you, I'll fight all of you." But the whispers only laughed, a chorus of mocking voices that echoed through the mausoleum. "You can't fight us, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice laced with amusement. "You are one of us now, and we will never let you go." The whispers intensified, growing louder and louder until they were all I could hear. My mind began to unravel, my sanity slipping away. I was lost, trapped in a world of darkness and despair, with no hope of escape. I was one of the damned now, and I would remain here forever, trapped within the echoes of the Blackwood estate, tormented by the voices of the dead. As my mind shattered, the whispers finally faded, replaced by a chilling silence, an oppressive stillness that was more terrifying than anything I had ever experienced. I was alone. Chapter 6: The Portrait of Dorian Blackwood. Silence, as I discovered, is a weapon far more insidious than any scream. The cacophony of the damned, while torturous, was at least a presence, a perverse form of company. The silence, however, was an utter void, a blank canvas on which my fractured mind began to paint its own horrors. Time lost all meaning. I existed only as a consciousness adrift in the darkness of the mausoleum, a prisoner within my own corrupted thoughts. The transformation, the ritual, they had not merely changed my body but had irrevocably warped my soul. I was no longer Thomas Blackwood, the loving husband, the rational skeptic. I was something else entirely, something Blackwood. Days, perhaps weeks, bled into one another. The storm outside eventually subsided, replaced by an eerie calm that only amplified the unease within the mausoleum. Hunger gnawed at me, a primal urge that was twisted and corrupted by the darkness that now permeated my being. The thought of normal food repulsed me. What I craved was something else, something darker. One day, or what I perceived as a day, I felt a strange compulsion to move. My limbs, still stiff and unresponsive, obeyed reluctantly. I rose from the altar, my body aching, my head throbbing. The whispers, though fainter, were still present, a constant undercurrent of tormented thoughts. I stumbled through the mausoleum, my eyes adjusting to the gloom. I noticed details I had missed before, the intricate carvings on the coffins, the faded tapestries depicting scenes of dark rituals, the strange symbols etched into the stone walls. This place was not just a tomb. It was a shrine, a testament to the Blackwood family's obsession with the occult. Drawn by an unseen force, I made my way to the back of the mausoleum, to a small alcove hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. I pulled back the curtain, revealing a portrait. It was a portrait of a man, a striking figure with piercing blue eyes, a strong jawline, and a haughty expression. He was dressed in elegant attire, a dark velvet coat and a lace collar. There was an air of arrogance about him, a sense of entitlement that was both alluring and repulsive. As I gazed at the portrait, I felt a strange sense of recognition, a chilling familiarity. It was as if I knew this man, as if he were a part of me. Then I heard the whispers again. They were louder this time, more coherent, focusing on the portrait. Dorian, our founder, the master. I realized then that the portrait was of Dorian Blackwood, the patriarch who had built the estate, the man who had first delved into the darkness that now haunted it. He was the source of the Blackwood family's power, the architect of their damnation. As I stared at the portrait, I felt a strange connection to Dorian Blackwood, a sense of kinship that transcended time and space. It was as if his spirit were reaching out to me, beckoning me to follow in his footsteps. Then I noticed something else. The portrait was changing. The man's features seemed to shift, to subtly distort, as if reflecting the darkness within me. His eyes grew darker, his smile more cruel, his expression more haughty. It was as if the portrait were absorbing my soul, transforming itself into a mirror of my own corruption. Terrified, I stumbled back from the portrait, pulling the velvet curtain closed. I couldn't bear to look at it any longer. But the image remained etched in my mind, a haunting reminder of the darkness that now controlled me. Driven by a desperate need to understand what was happening, I left the mausoleum, venturing out into the overgrown graveyard. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the tombstones. The air was still and heavy, thick with the scent of decay. I wandered aimlessly through the graveyard, reading the names on the headstones, searching for some clue, some explanation for the horrors that had befallen me. Then I came across a headstone that caught my eye. It was a simple, unassuming marker, half hidden beneath a tangle of vines. I brushed away the foliage, revealing the inscription. Thomas Blackwood, 1978-2024. Beloved husband and son. My blood ran cold. I stared at the headstone, my mind reeling. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the name was there, etched in stone, a chilling declaration of my own demise. Had I truly died in the car crash? Was I now just a ghost, a phantom trapped within the Blackwood estate? Or was this headstone a prophecy, a glimpse into a future that I was powerless to prevent? As I stood there, paralyzed by fear, I heard a voice behind me. "Looking for something, Thomas?" I turned to see Sarah standing there, her eyes glowing with that unholy light. She smiled, a chilling rictus that sent shivers down my spine. "Perhaps you're wondering about that headstone," she said, gesturing towards it with a skeletal hand. "It's a reminder, Thomas, a reminder of what you once were and what you have become." She took a step towards me, her voice a chilling whisper. "You are not Thomas Blackwood anymore, Thomas. You are something else entirely. You are Blackwood." She reached out and touched my face, her fingers cold against my skin. "Embrace it, Thomas. Embrace your destiny. Become who you are meant to be." I looked into her eyes, searching for some trace of the woman I had loved. But there was nothing there, only darkness. And in that darkness, I saw my own reflection. The reflection of Dorian Blackwood. Chapter 7: The Library of Lost Souls. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I was not merely haunted by the spirit of Dorian Blackwood, I was becoming him. The transformation, the ritual, the whispers, they were all part of a process, a carefully orchestrated plan to resurrect the patriarch of the Blackwood family within me. Sarah, or the entity that wore her skin, watched with cold amusement as the horror dawned on my face. "Yes, Thomas," she whispered, her voice laced with a perverse satisfaction. "You are the vessel, the instrument of his return, and you will serve him faithfully." Despair threatened to consume me, but a spark of defiance still flickered within. I would not surrender. I would not become a puppet in Dorian Blackwood's twisted game. "I'll fight you," I rasped, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'll fight him. I won't let you take me over." Sarah laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the graveyard. "You cannot fight destiny, Thomas. Dorian's will is too strong. He has waited centuries for this moment, and he will not be denied." She gestured towards the manor house, its looming silhouette a constant reminder of the darkness that permeated the estate. "There is much you do not understand, Thomas. Much you will learn. Come, I will show you the path." Despite my resistance, my body obeyed her command. It was as if my will was no longer my own, as if I were a marionette dancing to her tune. She led me towards the house, my feet dragging against the overgrown earth. We entered through the grand front doors, the heavy oak panels creaking open as if in anticipation. The interior of the house was even more unsettling than I remembered. Dust-covered furniture stood like ghostly sentinels, casting long, eerie shadows across the cavernous rooms. The air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something indescribably foul. Sarah led me through the maze of echoing hallways, past rooms filled with forgotten relics and disturbing artifacts. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as we progressed, the voices of the damned swirling around me like a vortex of tormented souls. Finally, we reached our destination, the library. It was a vast, imposing room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The shelves were filled with ancient tomes, their spines faded and cracked, their pages filled with forbidden knowledge. The air in the library was heavy, oppressive, charged with an almost palpable sense of power. "This is where it all began, Thomas," Sarah said, her voice a chilling whisper. "This is where Dorian Blackwood discovered the secrets that would change our family forever." She gestured towards a massive, leather-bound book that lay open on a pedestal in the center of the room. The book was written in a language I didn't recognize, its pages filled with strange symbols and disturbing illustrations. "This is the Liber Maleficarum," Sarah explained, her eyes gleaming with an unholy light. "The Book of Evil. It contains the knowledge of the Ancient Ones, the secrets of summoning and binding demons, the rituals of immortality." She beckoned me closer. "Read it, Thomas. Understand it. Embrace the power that lies within its pages." Hesitantly, I approached the book. The air around it seemed to shimmer with an unholy energy. I reached out and touched the ancient pages, my fingers tracing the strange symbols. As I touched the book, a surge of energy coursed through my body. Images flooded my mind. Visions of dark rituals, of sacrifices made in the name of ancient gods, of the Blackwood family's descent into madness. I saw Dorian Blackwood himself, performing a ritual in this very library, his face illuminated by the flickering light of candles. He was summoning something dark and malevolent, something that answered his call with a terrifying eagerness. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as the memories flooded my mind. They were not just the voices of the damned anymore. They were the thoughts of Dorian Blackwood himself, his ambitions, his desires, his twisted philosophy. Power, immortality, control. The words echoed in my mind, seductive and alluring. I felt myself drawn to them, compelled to embrace the darkness that had consumed Dorian Blackwood. But then I saw something else. I saw the consequences of his actions, the suffering he had inflicted, the lives he had destroyed. I saw the Blackwood family's descent into madness, their obsession with power leading to their ultimate downfall. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I could not follow in his footsteps. I could not become a monster. With a surge of will, I tore my hand away from the Liber Maleficarum. The images faded, the whispers subsided. I staggered back, gasping for breath, my body trembling. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "I won't do it." Sarah's face contorted with rage. "You fool!" she screamed, her voice rising to a deafening pitch. "You dare defy me, you dare defy Dorian." She raised her hand and the library began to tremble. Books tumbled from the shelves, the windows shattered and the walls began to crack. The darkness seemed to press in on me, suffocating me. "You will pay for this, Thomas," she shrieked. "You will suffer for your defiance." Suddenly, the ground beneath my feet gave way. I screamed as I plunged into the darkness, falling into a bottomless abyss. Chapter 8: The Descent. The fall was endless, a swirling vortex of darkness and despair. The screams of the damned echoed around me, a chorus of torment that seemed to be both inside and outside my head. I had no sense of direction, no way of knowing where I was going or when the descent would end. I was falling, and I was alone. Then I felt a jarring impact. The fall stopped abruptly, and I landed with a sickening thud on a cold, hard surface. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. I tried to sit up, but my limbs were heavy, unresponsive. I was in a tunnel, a narrow, claustrophobic passageway carved out of the earth. The walls were damp and slick, covered with a thick layer of slime. The air was stale and heavy, thick with the stench of decay and something else, something indescribably foul. I could barely see, but I could make out the faint outlines of symbols carved into the walls, the same symbols that I had seen in the Liber Maleficarum and in the mausoleum. They were ancient, archaic, and deeply unsettling. I heard the whispers again, but they were different now. They were closer, more insistent, and they seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. "Join us. Become one. Embrace the darkness." They were not whispers anymore. They were voices, distinct and commanding, and they were calling to me with a renewed urgency. I crawled forward, my hands scraping against the rough stone floor. The tunnel seemed to twist and turn endlessly, leading me deeper and deeper into the earth. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint glow of the symbols on the walls. As I crawled, I began to see other things. Glimpses of figures flickering in the darkness, their forms distorted and grotesque. I could hear their tortured moans, their desperate pleas for release. I realized then that I was not alone. I was surrounded by the damned, the victims of Dorian Blackwood's dark rituals, their souls trapped within this subterranean labyrinth. Then I saw it. At the end of the tunnel, a light. a faint, flickering glow that beckoned me forward. Driven by a desperate hope for escape, I crawled towards the light. The tunnel began to widen and the whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they were deafening. I reached the end of the tunnel and found myself in a vast, cavernous chamber. The chamber was filled with a subterranean lake, its surface as black as obsidian, reflecting the eerie light that emanated from the walls. In the center of the lake, a stone altar stood bathed in the eerie glow. Upon the altar lay a figure draped in white robes. It was Sarah. Or rather, what was left of her. Her skin was pale and translucent, her features gaunt and skeletal. Her eyes glowed with an unholy light and her lips were curved in a chilling smile. But her body was changed. It was becoming something else, something monstrous, something that defied description. And standing beside her, his face illuminated by the unearthly glow, was Dorian Blackwood. His portrait, his spirit, his essence. He had taken control of Sarah's body, transforming her into a grotesque mockery of the woman I had loved. "Welcome, Thomas," Dorian said, his voice a chilling echo of the past. "We have been waiting for you." He gestured towards the altar. "Come, join us, embrace your destiny, become one with the darkness." Sarah, her voice now a grotesque parody of her own, echoed Dorian's words. "Join us, Thomas. Embrace your destiny, become one with us." I looked around the cavernous chamber, at the tortured souls, the grotesque figures, the darkness that permeated every corner of this subterranean world. I saw the truth, the full horror of what had been planned for me. And I knew with a chilling certainty that I could not succumb. I rose to my feet, ignoring the pain that racked my body. My resolve, my refusal to surrender, was stronger than ever. "I won't," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I won't join you. I won't become a monster." Dorian laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You have no choice, Thomas. You are weak, vulnerable. You will succumb to the power." He raised his hand and the darkness around me intensified. The whispers grew louder, the tormented souls swirled around me. I felt myself being pulled towards the altar, towards the monstrous Sarah, towards the darkness that threatened to consume me. But then I remembered the portrait. I remembered the fleeting glimpse of Dorian Blackwood's own corruption, the twisted legacy of his actions. I focused on that memory, clinging to the flicker of human defiance that remained within me. And in that moment I saw a way out. I took a deep breath and I closed my eyes, focusing all my remaining strength, all my will. Then I released it. Then I will choose my own destiny, I thought, and as my final thought, I chose to destroy the darkness and its master. I focused all of my will, my energy, and my remaining memories. I imagined the house, the graveyard, the library, and the portrait. I imagined the ritual chamber, the altar, and the monstrous form of Sarah. I imagined the power, the darkness, the whispers, and the torment. And then I let it go. I let it all go. There was a blinding flash of light, a deafening roar, and then nothing. The end.